maybe related to the Blessed Mother. I remember my wife says the first time that she saw and read the Hail Holy Queen prayer, it was really difficult for her, to see these words of great veneration expressed to the Blessed Mother and to the saints. So that was a little bit of a difficulty for me. It wasn't so much that I didn't understand the Catholic doctrine of the saints and how that was really this understanding of this friendship and their intercession for us, and the honor that they had, not because just because of who they were, but because of God's grace in their lives. But sometimes little more things would rub you a certain way, related to the saints or certain devotions to the saints and that sort of thing. Those are maybe some of the more theological things on the whole. I would say certainly just the fears related to relationships, issues related to our children, especially our older kids, who we really turn their lives upside down, was certainly something that was a struggle to think, oh my goodness, are we totally destroying their lives, saying your parents have all of a sudden had this epiphany, and where does that leave you? And one of the really neat things with our oldest couple of children who were the most entrenched in the Methodist Church and in the youth group and loved it and most resistant, was to see how over the years our two oldest, Chelsea and Lizzie, have really come to embrace the faith. My daughter, 16-year-old, got to go to World Youth Day with Pope Benedict this past summer through the generosity of a benefactor, and it's just to see how God's grace has worked in their lives to come to embrace the faith. It's just been one of the richest blessings in my life.
The question earlier about the difference between the Methodist Church and other Protestant denominations, I'm wondering, for many of the ministers that I've interviewed on the journey home for the last 11 years, a lot of them, because of the denomination, the theology they came from, their journey to the church involved a lot of rejection. For me, as a Calvinist, I had to reject a lot of theology to accept Catholic theology. So my good friend Bruce Sullivan, who was a Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, there's a lot of rejection of ideas. But I'm wondering, in some ways, Methodism, good, faithful, United Methodism, is a wonderful stepping stone towards the Catholic Church, it seems to me. I don't know if you agree.
Methodists make great Catholic. and the reason I say that is because I wanted, and I've tried to say this so many times, I'm not sure I'm always convincing to many of my Methodist friends, is that to become Catholic was not a rejection of who I was. It was not to say everything I once believed was wrong, now I think I can worship Mary, in that sense.
That's not what you were thinking.
Exactly. In other words, what Catholicism is what I already believed in Methodism brought to even deeper fullness. For example, I always had as a Methodist a deep respect for communion and for this idea that Christ was at least mysteriously present somehow in the act of taking communion, not necessarily in the elements themselves, but there was a spiritual mystery there. Then to understand in Catholicism that he's really and truly present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, is not a contradiction, it's a greater intensification. As a Methodist, I always had this understanding that our communion, our fellowship with the saints, we said the Apostles' Creed regularly, the communion of saints. We said the Holy Catholic Church, but we always put a little asterisk that said that meant universal, But the communion of saints, that this relationship with those who have gone before us is unbroken by death. But now to understand in Catholicism that, yes, that's true. Not only that, they intercede for us. And we can, just like I ask my friends for prayer, these are my heavenly friends who are in God's presence. I can ask for their prayers, And so it's not a rejection of anything. It's an embracing of a greater fullness, it's even more than I had led my heart to believe. That's why I think my heart felt like it was going to burst. It was more than my heart can hold, really, the beauty of it.
There's even some possibility that Wesley himself was moving in a more Catholic direction because of the renewal he wanted to accomplish, but he was being fed by Catholic spirituality. So
he was a daily communicant in the Church of England. He was heavily influenced by Catholic mystics and Catholic saints and his theology.
Email comes from Mark in Maryland. Mr. Allen, I am 16 years old. I was raised in the Church of God, but then about 4 years ago joined the United Methodist Church. I am currently in my journey home to the Catholic Church in the RCIA program. Welcome, Mark. A friend, a United Methodist pastor, and my former pastor have been challenging me about my journey home. They have been pressing especially about the transubstantiation doctrine and the doctrine of the saints and one blessed mother, all the things you just mentioned. How should I approach my friend and former pastor to try to explain my choice to journey into the church? How should I explain to them my newfound belief? Thank you, Mark, for your email. And our prayers are with you.
Yes, Mark, our prayers are, because I know that can be a very daunting, and for a young man especially, I want to affirm your desire for the truth. I would say certainly with it's many of the things that I've already talked about in terms of that Catholicism is not a rejection of Methodist theology, but a bringing it really to a greater sense of fullness. You might look in John chapter 6, Jesus' very strong words about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. I remember a few years ago as a Methodist pastor preaching on that very passage, a sermon about communion, and the boldness of those words of Jesus and how they turned people away. This was before I was even Catholic. To see this sense of the offense of this idea, and yet how Jesus doesn't back away from what he claims about himself, that they are to consume his flesh and blood. You can also look in many of the early church fathers, Justin Martyr, and some of his work, and begin to see Irenaeus, this sense of this belief in Christ's presence in the Eucharist from the very early centuries of the church. This wasn't some new development, but very early in the history of the church. The devotion of the saints also traces back. That was the thing that surprised me the most, were how many of these doctrines that I thought were just these peculiar Catholic doctrines actually trace back to some of the earliest centuries of the church, to the people who were the disciples of the original disciples, or 2 generations removed. And to think, when you look at these early church fathers and in their writings, they're not Protestants. They're Catholics, very much in their view. So Mark, blessings on you as you continue this journey.
Now, I need to